Every dollar that a utility makes is coming from a customer.
What will the role of the utility be with those C&I customers?
What about accounting? What about finance? What about rate making? Types of load that we're seeing requested right now are no longer small modular reactors. They're multiple big reactors.
Three-legged stool: rates, reliability, and clean or sustainable. And of course, it's the customer sitting on top of the stool.
How is AI going to change the way we respond to our customers?
What do you think success looks like as a utility leader? It used to take us 12 months to get transformers. Now it takes 36 months. What are we going to do? Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Watt and Why podcast. We have a great guest with us today, so we're going to dive right into it. I'm going to introduce our guest. Jay Stowe is the principal at the Stowe Utility Group, where he is helping utilities across the U.S. meet customer expectations and help with the many issues that are challenging utility leaders today. Jay is uniquely qualified to do this because he has been CEO not at only one, but two large municipal utilities, JEA down in Jacksonville and Huntsville Utilities in Alabama. So Jay, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. Great. But by the way, Jay is now based in Chicago, so he's one short flight from just about anywhere in the country. So I know he's getting used to that cadence. What we wanted to do today is really kind of take a peek, if you will, behind the curtain in terms of what is going through a CEO's mind with all the different things that are happening in the industry today. And I don't think I need to tell our audience what a lot of these things are, but in very large chunks, I want to talk with Jay about the role of the customer and the expectations in terms of both the customer's expectation, but also on the utility side as well. And we'll share some thoughts on that. From there, we'll go into the fuel mix. And of course, as we move deeper into the energy transition, this is a topic that drives, I won't say every decision at a utility, but certainly a lot of the major decisions, some of which, of course, are very expensive. We're also going to look at the affordability crisis. I'm very fortunate that I have an opportunity to speak with, any given month, dozens of utility leaders, and affordability is at or near the top of the list for most of these folks. And then finally, the workforce. Who's going to actually get all this stuff done? And I think, as we all know, the workforce is changing. There's a lot of interesting changes. Some are challenges for utilities, others are opportunities. So that's kind of the landscape we'll cover today at a very high level. And I do want to jump in and let's talk with Jay about the role of the customer. So kind of my little soapbox about the customer and utility relationship is we've seen this relationship go from talking about meters to ratepayers to customers who are engaged and having a great customer experience. All good things, all directionally correct. So I think that what we're looking at in terms of as we go from meter to customer to ratepayer, to highly engaged, we want that customer to be participating with the utility. This can be in the form of participating in different programs like energy efficiency and demand response. It can also be something where the utility needs that participation to meet some of their goals. When you start talking about things like reshaping the load curve, managing affordability, and partnering with utilities on these things. These are not small issues. So I want to throw it over to you, Jay, and tell us a little bit more about what you've experienced when you start thinking about not just the customer expectation, but the role of that customer.
It gets more complicated. And the more customers want to be involved, then the more complex the engineering back end of the systems
Absolutely.
are. I think one of the things I talk about is the reality is that we serve every single customer. When a utility doesn't get to pick, they serve everyone. And so you've got people that have been on the system for a very long time that might be very comfortable with the way they've always done things. And then you've got people that are just now signing up for service today, and they may not even have a checkbook. And so we have to meet people where they are. I think what your point is that there's more and more people that are more interested in becoming engaged. And in part, that is driven by what a topic we'll talk about a little bit more later, but the affordability, the cost. People want to be able to have more control over it. I think we also lose track most of the time, at least in my head, most of the time when we talk about customers, we go pretty quickly to residential customers because there's more of them. But how we're going to meet the expectations of our commercial and industrial customers that are also seeing price increases and want something different than they used to have. And all of a sudden, some of the return on investment that used to not be there to put in some sort of backup generation or put their own generation in place is now becoming something that's practical. And that practical is getting smaller. The reality is that is used to be something on a large scale customer, and now it's getting smaller and smaller as we see expectations change, costs change, and access to generation change. It's a lot of moving parts and pieces in the role of a customer.
Yeah, and that opens up a whole Pandora's box of different things like what will the role of the utility be with those CNI customers in maybe 3 to 5 years? What are the limitations there? How can utilities kind of get ahead of that? Um, so let me again step back just a little bit. And when we talk about the role of the customer and expectations, I want to ask you, what does success look like? Utilities are typically run by people like, financial analysts and engineers, kind of metrics people, right? When you get to the customer side of things, obviously there's customer satisfaction and a lot of those different types of data points. But what do you think success looks like as a utility leader? If you were having a town hall meeting and you're hearing about different things from your customers, what does success look like at that level?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it's we do have measurements for that. There are a variety of customer satisfaction surveys, and so that becomes the easiest one for us to measure. But I think it also has to do with how efficient we're being with the dollars. Every dollar that a utility makes is coming from a customer, and so it becomes our responsibility to treat that appropriately and to keep the cost down. And so, but we're in this pressure right now. We're seeing rates increase, and it's gonna require a lot of work on not just the traditional customer group, but the rest of the organization needs to understand their role in interacting with the customers, both directly if you're on site with someone, but then also indirectly with how we set rates and how we provide opportunities for those same customers that are interested in doing more. We need to be able to set our rates and our policies and our procedures in a way that will allow them the flexibility to do what they want. It should be something that's beneficial for the individual customer, the utility, and then all the other customers too. If one of those gets out of whack and the utility is gaining more than all the customers or that individual customers, then it's a problem. If the individual customer is doing something that shifts cost to everyone else, then that's not a positive thing. And the same thing if we're starting to cause that individual customer not to be able to do something because we're in the traditional one size fits all answer to the question, then that becomes a problem too.
Yeah, and I think as you were describing that, I was thinking about, we see today with large CNI customers, we might call them AI and data centers, right?
We might, yeah.
That may be tipping the scale to your point. But, the other point you were making about everyone in the utility having some level of focus on the customer, even those areas that may not traditionally they have thought of the customer. One example I'll just share is a large investor-owned utility out here in the West. They were going down a path of putting in a new ADMS. Not a small task. It's technology and project nightmare, right? Data and all the different parts and pieces and everything. Before they started, they had everyone on the project go to customer service training. And I'd never heard that before. And I said, why? Just to learn a little bit more about it. And he said, well, what was interesting is when we got into the project, the people on the project team were asking questions that they never would have asked before. Like when you're changing out systems and there's different data involved, how's this going to touch the customer? How, when, if, where will the customer see this? Okay, when we have an outage, what's that going to look like for the customer? So the discussion was still, of course, very technical in nature, but it was really more about how's the technology impacting the customer in ways that were good or bad. So I think there is this evolution in the space for sure. And I think there's some interesting things happening on that front. a lot of what we've talked about as we talk about the customer really comes down to a lot of the changes in the energy landscape, which leads us to talking about the fuel mix. I think every utility is somewhere on the path of their own energy transition. They may have state PUC mandated goals. They may have a utilities board or a commission that's mandating goals, or they may have mandated goals themselves. I know there are some utilities in some states where they don't have a lot of energy transition goals, so they've taken it upon themselves. So let's accept that everyone's on this path. Some are further ahead than others. But as you do look to the years ahead with this shifting landscape, where should utility leaders be placing their bets? And for today, but also for 5, 10, utilities look at 20 years out typically. So another little hypothesis I'll share is that I think a lot of the low-hanging fruit is kind of gone. Things around rooftop solar penetration, batteries at a certain scale, working with third-party developers around solar or wind farms. A lot of those things, they're there, they're great, but as you move further into the 50, 60, 70, 80% renewables in your fuel mix, it starts to get more complicated, which means more expensive and perhaps less reliability. So one final thought, and then I'm going to throw it over to you. And we talked a little bit about this when we were talking previously, is I was at a conference recently and one of the speakers said, you can't legislate against the laws of physics. And I wrote that down because I thought that's great. And that's true. And unfortunately, energy becomes very politically charged as it is today. And I think something that says, you can set all the goals you want and you can do all the hand waving you want. But at the end of the day, there's some really serious, engineering and physics involved here that's going to really tell you what you can or can't do. So what do you think, again, as a utility leader, how should you be thinking about this?
There's a lot of information in that question. So let me start by saying the question that I heard that kind of stuck out is, where should leaders be placing their bets? And I'm not actually touching that one because the reality is that every single utility ends up having different sets of criteria that they need to base their decisions on, and so you've got to be aware of the community. But in general, absolutely, physics is going to win ultimately because it's how the system works. But I believe a diversified portfolio is a much better alternative. And I don't mean that by saying we need to have renewables for renewables' sake. But if you rewind all the way back to the 70s, there were utilities that were using fuel oil as their 100% of their generation, and they had done great. They had lots of low rates, good returns. Everything was positive until the fuel crisis hit. Now, this is 50 years ago, and it caused a spike. And so then there were people putting in other solutions. And then you keep on moving forward. In the early 2000s, we had a lot of gas going in, and gas spiked, and it caused a problem. And so my preference in running and operating a utility system would be to keep a diversified portfolio where you have some natural gas, you have some demand response, some energy efficiency, some renewables, some storage, and some of those parts and pieces that didn't make sense just a few years ago. Nuclear had dropped off. It's pretty expensive. Is it the right answer now? It could be because of the pressure that we're getting from these large loads that are coming in. And so I think keep it as balanced as you can. Understand that if you get too far in one direction or the other, and something happens with the either physics, as you talked about, or finance, which is a form of physics, I suppose. If one of those causes problems, then if you're more diversified, then it helps deal with the risk associated with it.
Agree. And I had a couple of follow-ups with you here. You did mention nuclear, and that's clearly going to be part of the mix. I think there's no getting around that. And I know you spent some time as an executive with TVA as well. And I know 3 weeks ago, they announced they're going to buy 6 gigawatts of small modular reactors over the next few years. We'll see how quickly that can happen. Where do you think that fits into the SMRs fit into this energy mix as we go forward?
I think it becomes a matter of what the need for the local utility is versus the cost. What's the cost, the reliability and sustainability? What are those items that you have to balance to then also be able to serve the customer and serve the customer well? Historically, as you've had large loads, then we've had economic development incentives that actually reduce the rates for some of these large loads because the theory was that it helped everyone. And that's true when the large load was incremental. When it is an entirely different level, then there's no longer the discount that some of these large systems get. They may have to pay for uh, these large increases again to keep the customers, all of the customers, whole in the process. And so there are going to be places where it makes absolute sense to go ahead and build nuclear or hydrogen or small modular reactors, and then we can put those in. One of the concerns I have is that the types of load that we're seeing requested right now are no longer small modular reactors; they're multiple big reactors, and so it just becomes a difference of what is the fastest way to get the least cost option to all of the customers to be able to keep the system operating and whole.
Yes. And on that note, since we're talking about these large loads, I've been doing a little bit of work on on-site generation, the other side of the meter, right? I'm a big developer. I'm going to build this massive data center. It's going to be awesome. And oh, by the way, we're going to build our own generation. How should a utility, if that was in your service territory, there in Jacksonville, let's say, how do you respond to that? Do you say, let's take a meeting, see how we can partner on this, or do you see that as a threat to your core business, or hey, that's great because that's one less headache for me in terms of trying to figure out how to meet that demand, or where do you land on that?
Well, I can tell you where I would have landed on it 10 years ago is that's our job. We'll take care of it for you. I don't know if that's the right answer anymore because I think it's a little different because they're talking about now some places are talking about putting in and serving their entire load with some amount. But there's also customers that are saying, I want to put in batteries. I want to put in some kind of generation, whether it's solar or some other generation. There's a lot of kind of generation that's out there in the system that was originally indicated for emergency backup. Well, if we put the right switch gears and the right planning in place, then we can talk about how we can better manage the load and energy use all the way past the meter. Historically, we stopped at the meter, and so I think it's a balance. Now, I'm talking about smaller scale generation. The bigger scale generation, it might be the most efficient and fastest way to get these customers online is for them to partner. I don't think it's just in the dark. I don't think they just do it on their own. They'll still have to have connections. They'll need to be the interconnections and the cost that goes along with that, and the support that potentially you can use that generation for the rest of the system too. So I would absolutely have the meeting and try to figure out what is the best solution for all of our customers, not just the individual customer that's looking to add generation or a large load to the system.
Yeah, I think a lot of that will come down to what are the incentives or disincentives to go one way or the other, right? And
That's right.
yeah, as you were describing it, kind of the pre-data center world, I think there's a lot of microgrids out there, right? And I think that's a really good example of where that could be something that's on the other side of the meter that you can have all sorts of different incentives and partnering with that. And I think at scale that may exist as well. So interesting stuff.
That's what I would hope we can push for across the country. Yes.
Yeah, the only other thing before we move on to the next topic, just real briefly, is this idea of the utility, while we're talking about the fuel mix, of the utilities. If you go back 10 years ago, 100 years ago, we're going to provide reliable, affordable, safe energy, right? And then we added sustainability into that mix, which to me says that I've heard it described different ways, but I'll use the stool analogy. Three-legged stool: rates, reliability, and clean or sustainable. And of course, it's the customer sitting on top of the stool. I think that's a really good way of describing it, because I think if utilities don't do any one of those three, the customer is not in a good place, right? And I think
Yes.
that's what's going to dictate a lot of this going forward is, are you compromising rates and reliability? And if the answer is yes, you need to rethink this. I think we're about at that point as an industry.
Yeah, I also, this might be not a widely held view, but I think the sustainability needs to have a little bit of a different definition. For the last 10 years, it's meant green, and I think now we also have to put in some cost in that. How are you going to be a sustainable organization? And that might not always be more solar, because we go back to what I was talking about as far as a diversified portfolio. Sustainable also has to do with the finances, and sustainable has to do, actually ties back into affordability. What are we doing to make the people, really to improve the lives of the people we serve? In the end, that's what our job. We're trying to improve lives, encourage economic development, provide for the public health and safety. If we're doing those things and we do those things well, then we can be sustainable at the same time. So I think it's a matter of those three-legged stool. They're also tied together, so it's even more stable. They're not just individual legs; they're tied together too. If we just take that analogy to its fullest extent.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it'll be interesting to see how the industry embraces that over the next year or two. I mean, this is very near term. I think we're at that point where there's some really hard decisions are going to need to be made. You mentioned affordability. Actually, it's come up a couple of times so far. So I do want to talk with you about this. And I think so many utilities that I have the opportunity to speak with, they all talk about affordability. They have an initiative, they have a program, they have a special team, they're doing transformation, all good stuff. But I think we do need to ask ourselves, how do we get here? And I think there's some answers there, not the least of which is inflation, supply chain issues. I think there's some costs embedded in a lot of the renewable and clean energy things. So it's this intersection of all these things that are causing this affordability crisis. So again, you're sitting in the CEO's suite and you're grappling with this, and you're listening to your chief customer officer and your team that runs the grid. And oh my gosh, there's a new subdivision going in, and it used to take us 12 months to get transformers. Now it takes 36 months. What are we going to do? So there's all these different things. So when you boil it back to, okay, we need to figure out affordability. What's on that list, or what are the two of the three things that are at the top of your list in terms of this is how we're going to address this?
Again, there's a lot of parts and pieces, and a little nuanced to answer that, but um, there's some amount of economic development that is, quite frankly, we've said the best economic development in some places that I've been is our low rates. That encourages people to come to whatever location that is. And economic development has historically meant new or existing businesses expanding or new businesses coming in. It's been focused on the business side. But it also is like the new subdivision. And so I think there's going to have to be some more clarity around the cost of the service that we're providing, and who should be funding the different parts of that cost. Because if we provide incentives for people to come in, then if it does not have some sort of payback by itself, then that means other people are paying for it. And that is okay as long as it's understood and thought about more clearly, because affordability is really bigger than the utility bill itself. We really should be looking at what the total cost is. So if a subdivision is coming in and we push a lot of cost onto the subdivisions, then it makes the housing stock become more expensive. And everything gets more expensive at that point. Taxes are going to go up, and not tax rates, but the amount of money that people pay for their taxes, because the value of those homes are more. So it's all kind of tied together. The parts that we can control, though, are within, quite frankly, within the operations of the organization. How do we make the best decisions about capital? It's a very capital intensive business. Whether we're talking about utilities, electric primarily, but the same thing is true if you're running a water system or you're running a wastewater or gas system. There's very, very capital intensive. So you have to be sure that you are being thoughtful about what you're spending your capital on, and that you're doing that well. And then you can't forget the operational efficiencies. How do we run the utility to manage the cost, to supply the utility services to our customers in the best, most efficient way we can? And then now, as costs go up, I think it's going to make some of the energy efficiency programs that may have been on the edge of making sense in some areas. And it depends on where you are in the country, because there's a large difference in what people are paying in some parts of the country and other parts of the country. And so um, those those places that are just now starting to see some really big increases might be able to look to some other places, maybe in the West where, or in the Northeast, where the prices have been higher, and there have been a bigger push for some of the energy efficiency demand response programs that are already there. Learn from others. We're really good at helping other utilities, and we can learn from each other what to do. But drive down and make the energy efficiency as good and as across the board as possible.
As you were describing that, and again, we're gonna talk about C&I customers just for a minute here. Well, if I'm gonna build a factory, I'm a car company or something like furniture company or what have you, and I'm looking to put in a plant. It's going to be great. We're going to make a lot of PR. We're going to hire 2,000 people, and it's going to create all these jobs and all these great things. On the other hand, I'm also looking for the best place to put this in terms of, cost of land, readily available workforce, which we'll get into in a minute. The utilities actually kind of competing with other utilities in that sense. Is that not the case? So for instance, if they're looking for incentives, yet at the same time, the utility is saying, we don't know if we want all of our service territory to be bearing the cost of serving just you. So how do you balance those incentives with the fact that, holy cow, this is really going to increase our costs, in ways that we hadn't thought of?
Yeah, again, it really is a local issue, because and the decision has to be based on what the expectations of the local community are. Because if you, again, historically, what I have wanted to look at is the capital investment that is being made, and the jobs that are being created, and the load that's coming online. Now, the capital investment and the jobs are not direct impacts to the utility. Those are secondary impacts, because if they put a large capital investment and have a lot of jobs, and those jobs are going to be people that need houses, that then need restaurants, that need places to shop. And so it all flows out. So that's the justification for jobs and capital investment. If it is solely based on the load, then it's a different model. And that's a debate that people have right now with data centers. There are some places that are all about bringing in data centers because it's large capital investment. It's not necessarily a lot of jobs, but it brings in a lot of tax dollars because of the capital investment. And then for the utility, it's a very large load, and that sometimes, if it's done correctly, can be beneficial to all the customers. And so you have to balance all those things. So is it capital investment, load, jobs, and then overall impact? That's a new thing. The overall impact is something that you have to start thinking about differently, because when you're adding just a few megawatts here and there, then it was positive and we kept on growing and it was incremental, and you didn't have this huge spike. Now you've got places that are coming in and they need a lot more transmission, a lot more generation, and they need it now. And it's taken 7 years to do it. When it was tiny sawtooth kind of things, then it was something we could do incrementally. And we're no longer doing things incrementally. These are massive new decisions, new loads. It's a different ballgame and a different set of criteria that local communities have to consider when they're working through it.
All right. We've talked about the workforce a little bit, as we've talked about customers, the fuel mix, the affordability crisis. Someone has to do all this, and that's the workforce. I know you've been in the industry probably longer than me. I'm 35 years in, and we've seen the evolution where about 15 or so years ago, we started hearing about, the silver tsunami and all the massive retirements and all that. And I think we're at a place now where you hear things like there's 4 different generations of demographics in the workforce all at once, and the new folks are coming in and they have completely different expectations around, say, work-life balance. Yet on the other hand, they're maybe more tech savvy. And when you hold that up against what the utility needs today versus what they needed 10 or 15 years ago, if you're not going to have a fleet of generating plants, you don't need a bunch of boiler mechanics and electricians, but you may need data scientists and analysts and wind turbine technicians and so on and so forth. So looking at the workforce and meeting these needs of what this new energy landscape looks like, what are some things that utility leaders should be looking at in terms of making sure that, hey, we're going to be doing things with AI. We need to make sure we have AI capabilities. We're going to be over 50% renewable energy in the next 3 years. What is our staffing needs to be able to manage that? So what are some things you'd be looking at sitting in that CEO seat?
I don't understand this wholly yet. I'm not sure that a whole lot of people do yet, but the impact that AI is going to have on every industry probably, but on our industry specifically, we have spent a lot of time today even talking about what that impact might be on load and revenue, and how do we serve economic development? How do we make a difference there? What we have to also talk about when it comes to the workforce is how is it going to change the way we do things inside the business. But how is AI going to change the way we respond to our customers? How is it going to change the speed at which we can restore power? How is it going to reduce outages so that maybe they're not happening as frequently? If they're not happening as frequently, then maybe that requires less line workers to be able to do the distribution side of the world. So I have traditionally, if you count the last 2 or 3 years as AI has started to grow, thought that this was something that was going to happen inside the office. I think it's going to start to happen across the organization, and we're going to see a different mindset and a different way we work. Traditionally, we're at a spot where the retirements that we thought were coming are coming, but the jobs that the people have done might be changing so dramatically and so quickly that lots of the way we approach things is going to need to be different. That's very high level because it's so new. Every day we're learning about something new and how we're going to be able to serve our customers, and how do we do that in the best way. It starts with is it start with some AI information that a call center agent is responding to, and they have information on the screen that they can pull up, and it helps them get to answers more quickly. Does it then advance where the AI is able to take some of the more straightforward calls, and you don't even know that it's not a person that you're talking to? Does it get to the place where everything is completely automated in AI on the call center side? That's where I was a few years ago. But now, what about accounting? What about finance? What about rate making? What about design and layout of subdivisions and things like that that might be able to be done? So the workforce change and talent change is turning at least as quickly as our load is increasing. But we spend a lot more time talking about load increasing than we do workforce changing.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I think one thing that I'll add to your list of where AI is going to be impactful is in the O&M side of things. There are so many things happening with all that equipment and devices out in the field, which, there's a utility has hundreds, or if it's a big utility, thousands of transformers, right? How can we manage those more predictively? That's one of the big swings that I think people are starting to look at. But also things like crew dispatch, using AI in that realm. There's just so much there. But so it wasn't too long ago you were in that CEO seat, year and a half, maybe 2 years. And were you seeing some areas where there was a critical shortage, like we need to do things differently? Was it the trades, linemen, electricians, et cetera? Was it more of the IT stuff around, data scientists, et cetera? Was it getting good power systems engineers? Where were some of those acute areas where you saw some challenges?
Yeah, we were starting to see more problems getting and keeping engineers, but even that I think changes. And so I would say that the AI thing is coming more quickly than ever before, but it wasn't that many years ago that we were climbing every single pole it wasn't that many years ago that we were pulling poles in with mules. And then we got better bucket trucks and safer equipment. And even on the O&M side, what we'll need to be able to do going forward is continue to have really good technical people, really good O&M people in the field, in the office, everywhere, to be able to make the right decisions on where do we best use this. Because like you said, on O&M side of things, have we been oversizing transformers for some number of years? Maybe so. Are those transformers now going to be ready for electric vehicles because they were oversized? Maybe so. Other places, were they designing on a tighter set of requirements and they're going to need to upgrade transformers more quickly? How can we manage that load so that we don't have to really double and triple invest in things that are already there? They're still good. And so that's the type of workforce that we're still going to need going forward. It's always changed. It's always gotten better, I think is the right term. It's always gotten different. It's always become different. And this is just another round of that. It's just happening so much faster than it did a number of years ago. I have some books that my dad gave me. He was in this business too. And it's from 1967, 68, and it's the third version of it. And it's distribution, electric distribution systems. It's very small books, and it defines what all the system is. And it hadn't changed. In 100 years, it has not changed. In the last 10 years, it's changed more than it did in the first 100. And the next 10 years is going to change more than that. So we've got to be ready for that, whether it's AI or whether it is new technology that we haven't even talked about yet. Small modular reactors, micro nuclear reactors, generation on-site, distributed energy resources across the systems. So many changes coming, and it all has to tie back into the workforce, the energy mix, the people that you're serving, the customers, and you've still got to be able to do it and do it at an affordable price because that's what we're called to do in this business.
I'm gonna give you one more kind of challenge. So before I was a developer putting in a data center, now I'm a executive headhunter. And I'm going to call you tomorrow and offer you a CEO job at a 500,000 meter utility. What's the first workforce question that you're going to ask that headhunter? Because you want to know this before you commit to going into being a CEO of a pretty good size utility.
Yeah, I'm going to want to know a little bit about the history of the workforce and what kind of relationship they have. And then my experience is that you have to have a very strong group of leaders to help be able to ask the questions. And so I would really, in what you've just described, I'd really focus first on who are the leaders that are in place right now, what skill sets do they bring, and then you can kind of go down through the organization from there. And then, on a sideline note, I would ask if there's any related to workforce, if there's any specific areas that you're having trouble kind of filling positions. But if you have strong leaders and a strong leadership team, and I've had the opportunity to work with some really strong leadership teams, and I would encourage, if I got that call, then that's one of the questions I would ask. Tell me about the leadership team. If someone else is getting that call, I would encourage them to do the same thing, because it's not a one-person game. You've got to have a strong team to be able to deal with all the changes and to serve the customers well.
Great. That's a great answer. I was wondering where you would take that. So, and that was a little bit of a curveball. So I appreciate you jumping in on that one. That's great. I think we are about at the end here. So I will thank our audience for joining us. Jay, I will thank you for your insights. Love talking with you. And I think we probably could have talked for another couple hours about some of this stuff. A lot going on, but really appreciate you sharing your insights and experiences. And maybe we'll do it again soon. But thanks again. And we'll see you next time on the Watt My podcast. Thanks, everybody.